Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today for another session of our Friday Fundamentals. My name is Steve. I'm going to be your guide for today. And today we're going to be talking about and taking a closer look at our material estimating feature of SoftPlan, what we call SoftList. We're going to be taking about 30 to 45 minutes to showcase the key points on creating a material report and discuss further how to make simple changes to how the material quantities are estimated. We hope that this demonstration will give you a better insight and understanding of this powerful tool. Creating a material report itself is very easy. It's just a push of a button, but understanding how SoftList works and knowing where and how to make changes to the defaults will show you how you can unlock the great potential of this tool. To start off with, we're going to create a new project, and we're going to use that project as an example project to run a material report off of. So at the start page here, I'm going to click on Create a New Project and give it a simple name. From the New Project dialog, I want to point out that the program will automatically assume you want to open a 3D tab, so you can look at your project in 3D, and it will also assume you want to open a SoftList tab. Those are options that you can turn off, but by default they will be on. And obviously we're going to leave both of those on here because we want to take a closer look at the 3D and the SoftList aspects of it. Once I hit OK, the project is in setup. Across the top, you see those tabs are initially created for us. We have a main floor tab. The program will assume your first drawing will be the main floor. There's a 3D textured tab available and a material report. It's a standard complete. I'm going to start drawing a very simplistic footprint of a building. I'm going to start with a 2x6 brick wall. It's just going to be about let's say 26 by about 14. And so what I'm doing here, if you're not familiar with SoftPlan, is just a basic sketch edit. That's how the program works. You sketch in your design, take a look at what you have drawn, and modify, in this case, the building footprint to be more precise. I'm going to do a zoom extent, take a look at the dimensions that are currently there, and I'm going to edit them to be a little bit more precise. I want 26 feet left to right, and here, right now, 14 feet up and down. I'll redimension the building so every dimension is nice and neat. I'll add a few more details. I'll go to the inside, pick a partition wall, add a couple of partitions, and quickly add some windows here to give it some detail. Say a 30 by 60 double hung. Some at the front. This dialog for the window or openings I can leave open and just go to where each window needs to be drawn, because then I can come back to this dialog and as necessary pick up a different library type, maybe an interior door. Say a 30 by 80. 2 interior doors, and then I'll finalize it with an interior or an entry door at the beginning. We'll use this one here at the beginning or at the front. So why are we discussing SoftList, or why is SoftList so important? We feel it's very important because as you are drawing your house, you're drawing with a series of highly defined objects. For example, this wall that we've drawn here, if I take a look at it through its edit properties, and I'm clicking here on an edit tool, selecting the wall, it gives me the properties of that wall, its height, etc. And if I select here for the definition, this is how the wall, and actually all 4 walls, because they all are relying on the same definition, it shows us how this wall is defined, and you can see how accurately we can define the materials within that wall. Brick, airspace, 2 top plates, 1 bottom plate, etc. With this level of detail, we can get a very accurate material report. It's just a matter of drawing the appropriate object that's appropriately defined, and the material report will take care of itself. Similarly with any opening, if I edit a window, for example, we can specify the size of the header, if the window is to have shutters or grill. All that information then is fed into the material report as well. So the floor plans themselves become a database of information that the material report pulls from to gain a material quantity. And because you're, for the most part, drawing a house already, pushing the button to get a material report is fairly simple and straightforward. You're already drawing the floor plan, so take it one step further and push the button for a material report. Well, with that in mind, it also is important to understand how complete and accurate the drawing is. So if this window was to have shutters, if I fail to put shutters on there, obviously I'm not going to get shutters in my material report. Well, nowhere would I get them in a 3D point of view. So if you're drafting with SoftList in mind, there may be certain aspects of the floor plan that you're going to concentrate more on than you would otherwise. Again, the accuracy of the material report is only as accurate as the floor plans that are being estimated from. So what you want to be aware of is that the various modes of SoftPlan, you're going to have to make sure that if you're looking for an accurate material report, all aspects that you need to estimate are included in the model and the floor plans. For example, let's come to floor system mode. We won't count any joist or subfloor without drawing them in. So I'll do a quick auto trace here, get some floor system elements drawn. I'll then switch to a roof mode, use an auto roof. From the framing point of view, I'm just going to quickly do an auto stick frame. So I'm just quickly getting an example here. But as I'm adding these elements, the material report, and I guess the 3D point of view as well, they're already being calculated. I'm going to come to room mode. From room mode, I can designate what these rooms are. The important thing with room mode as well, that it also puts into the program certain interiors. And you can see from the 3D preview in the lower left, there's a wall covering, a paint or wallpaper. There's also some electrical outlets that might automatically get added for each room. There's baseboard, there's a ceiling. If I can tilt my 3D up, oops, too much. You'll see that there's a ceiling up there. There's carpet or flooring that's now get added as well, and potentially chair rail or crown mold, depending on how the room that I'm adding is defined. And you can define these room for these interiors to dress it up any way you need it. I'll add an entry here in the middle. So I've added rooms to add further details, and again, those elements, the interiors, wall covering, baseboard, etc., those will get added to my material report. If I switch my drawing back to the default drawing mode, you can see some of the electrical elements that were added automatically by room mode. We got some outlets, some light fixtures in the room. The bathroom itself, by default, I don't believe has any electrical associated with it. It needs some special care, GFIs, etc. Usually the light is over top of the vanity. So that is not automatically added to a bathroom area. However, the other rooms are. I'm going to quickly come here and go to the model menu and create a basement. Our auto basement is a new feature of 2018. It allows you to quickly add a basement plan. The first message there was a reference point. I didn't add a reference point. Reference points are important. I'll say yes, let's add one. It automatically selects the appropriate reference point symbol for me, the circle, and allows me just to click on a common corner of the floor plan. So once that's in place, come back to auto basement, ask me for the name, basement's fine, what wall types I want. There is no garage walls here. Actually, there's no garage door. That's what the garage walls will be triggered off of. That's fine. I'll just hit OK, and it creates a brand new drawing. of my basement. It also assembles it under the model here on my navigation on the left side. And so if I take a look at it in a 3D point of view, well, there's my house. I can turn off the auto horizon. There's a button here for it, so I can see the basement fully. And the auto basement has created a basement wall type. It threw in some basement windows. If I tilt further underneath, there's a basement slab that gets added. So you can see how detailed the 3D model can be. And again, if I notice certain things missing, again, the shutters on the front windows, if I needed those, I make sure I put those in. Obviously, from a 3D point of view, it's very clear that I've missed them if I needed them. But the accuracy of the 3D model is also related to the accuracy of your material list. So if I click on our standard complete report, here's the list of current materials in this particular design. Taking a look at what we currently have, there's building permits to start off with, architectural and engineering fees. Some of these materials are controlled through prompts or prompt variables. And if I select this Edit Prompt Variables button above, I'm faced with this dialog, which allows me to, if necessary, turn those features on or off, or as necessary, change their cost information. So in this case, the building permit cost is, I'll change it here to $2,200 versus the $500. Termite protection. If I say no, that would be removed from the report. Now, these are the defaults for those elements. So changing them here, they will change for the next house as well. So it's a permanent change. So if I wanted this dialog to appear before the report was generated, I can select this. That allows me to change them on the fly. So as soon as I generate a report, it will prompt me with this if particular things in here need to change on a per house basis. If every house has a different feature or a different price for these things, you can have this dialog appear automatically by selecting this prompt on report generation at the bottom. So I'll do those two changes, hit OK. What we'll notice here is that the cost for our building permit has changed. Now, I didn't show you, but there was a termite protection around this area. It's now gone because I disabled it. We won't find it anymore. So that's the prompt variables. The report itself can also be modified for other features. So for example, what do we want to take a look at? Weep tile. Looks like I need about 88 feet of weep tile. Well, I think that's too much. So if I double click on that quantity, we are left with this dialog. We can modify that quantity by adjusting it through a value. So if I punch in a number here, we'll just increment the calculated value by that quantity. So 10, for example, and the displayed quantity would be 98. So 88 was the estimated quantity. I'm adding 10 more to it. Or we can multiply it. So 1.1 is just basically giving me 10% more. Or I can say, well, I just want to give me myself, I think, again, 88 is too much. I need about 75 feet. There's also the ability to specify a waste factor. Now, the waste factor can be defaulted into each material. Currently, all our waste factors are set to 0, but I'll show you eventually where we can go ahead and modify all waste factors. But right now, the default is 0, and if we needed to add it here, we can do so. Once I've made the changes to the quantity, I'll hit OK, and sure enough, the quantity is updated. You'll notice that's in a gray bar. That gray bar signifies that it's a modified value, and I can modify anything here. The cost, for example, it's just a matter of here double clicking, and well, it's 70 cents per foot. I don't call it weep tile, I call it drain tile, for example. Every time I make a modification, it puts it into gray because it's different from the defaults. And if I hover over it, as you can see the tooltips, it'll show me what that unmodified value is. If there's a material that I don't need, anchor bolts, for example, if I right-click on anchor bolts, there's an option to remove that line. Doing so does just that. It takes the line out. If there's a material missing, I can right-click and say Add Material or Add Line. It allows me to fill in information for that material that perhaps is missing. Across the top, first I'll show you the Show Removed Lines. If I had removed a line, such as the anchor bolts I did moments ago, if I want to see that line that hasn't been removed, I can check that button at the top and it will show me those lines with a overstrike. So there's a line through it. When we remove a line, the cost information for that material is not being added to the subtotals or grand totals of the total project. Whereas any cost modifications or other modified changes to an existing material, well, those will as well modify the subtotals and grand totals. So any changes to the report that are made on the fly here are affecting the report totals. It would make sense to do so. But again, these are on the fly modifications. They're not the defaults. Ultimately, if you always want 70 cents for your cost, or you never need anchor bolts for whatever reason, you can go ahead and remove those as the default. So we'll get to that in a moment. If you want to change or remove those modifications, if it's a removed line, you can right-click on a removed line and there'll be the option to re-add it. Doing so removes the gray and the overstrike, and it now adds its totals to the subtotals and grand totals. Or I can right-click on an existing modified line, a gray bar, and say remove that modification. Puts it back to the default. If I want to remove all modifications, that's what I can do with the button up here. And all the modifications are then removed, putting back their defaults. Now, every time you make a modification to a generated report, it will be saved with the whole report. Meaning, if I were to regenerate or change or make modifications to the floor plan that affect it, it will not lose those custom modifications. So once again, I'll put this back to drain tile, and I'll keep this at a fixed quantity of 70 feet. And if I come back to the main floor plan, if I were to make any modifications to the design, for example, I'll edit the 14-foot value and say, okay, it needs to be 16 feet. I'm going to do the link floors option. Selecting link floors means that it's also going to modify the same dimension on the basement plan that I created, so I don't have to modify it separately. I'll make my change in the up direction. There's a warning here that basement is also being modified. Are you sure you want to continue? I'll say yes. So I got 16 feet for the side dimension. And if I quickly bring up my basement plan, zoom up to it, well, it's done that same change to the basement plan that I've created. Once you've made a modification as such, if you come back to the report, it will update the totals, with the exception that anything has a modification. Previously, the unmodified value was 88 feet. Now it's 92 feet. So it has changed the total of materials here, but since I've modified drain tile to be 70 feet no matter what, it's not going to modify that value. Reviewing some of the materials that are listed here, taking a look at any material that has an asterisk beside it. These are materials that are included in the cut list report. And to view it, at the top here's a button for Show Cut List. And what this does, it takes each material that has that asterisk, and if it needs to be cut, it'll show you how those each material should be cut. So the quantities are going to give you in orderable lumber lengths, an 8-foot to 12-foot to 10-foot or whatever the length is. But it actually, in this case, for the wall studs, it got a bunch of 1-foot, 6.5-inch studs. I believe those are probably coming from the cripples beneath the windows I've added. So it's given me an orderable piece of lumber for it, but suggests that I cut them for those cripples. So that's what the cut list will do. It'll show you, and again, common rafters is a good example here. I have a bunch of rafters. They're all orderable lengths, 2x6 by 8 by 10, etc., but it needs to be cut in these sizes to fit the building. And if I uncheck or turn that off, it just brings us back to the original report. So there's all the common rafters. And again, that is signified by the asterisk. So anything with an asterisk is automatically added to a cut list report, and most of the framing members by default are already configured to do so. There's a couple of other features here. If I take a look at my navigation on the left, there are other report styles or report configurations that can be selected. I'll do the energy code as an example. What this one does, it takes a look at the building and determines through the energy code what type of flooring or area of the floor, area of the wall for each floor is required or has been defined. Another one here is lot coverage. Unfortunately, this one really won't do much for me because I haven't drawn a site plan, but you get a sense of what this will do for us. It will give me the area of the property, the area of non-permeable site information, so driveways, sidewalks, etc., that type of thing, and give me the lot coverage. I'm going to close these as I demonstrate them. And the final one I'll show you is a trade contractors report. The trade contractors report shows me, unlike I'll do the framing package here, it gives me a lineal length of all exterior framed walls versus all interior framed walls. So it gives a more of an assembly of the report versus breaking it down as the standard report does. So the standard report breaks it down for, if we go back to wall framing, each stud, length of wall plates, etc., whereas the trade contractors gives you more of an assembly, the lineal feet of framed wall, without breaking it down into that detail. Now we've been taking a look currently at the standard complete, but you'll discover that there's a couple of other standards. One is the standard summary and a standard by floor. Well, the by floor, as the name implies, will list materials as they appear on each floor. So here's the material for the basement plan, and then the materials required for the main floor plan. Now, the benefit of that is if there were, let's say that it had a second floor plan as well, it would tell me how many studs are required for the first floor versus how many studs are required for the second floor. And that helps in ordering the studs, so I can order a first floor framing package and then order a later date a second floor framing package. There's also a standard summary, and if I run that, what it does, it gives you basically the same totals, but it kind of hides the intermediate costs. So for example, it just gives me a unit cost and unit labor cost. It doesn't indicate that there is a markup or how much each unit costs. It's just a grand total for it. So taking a look at the standard complete, you can see how detailed the columns are versus that of the standard. And we can further define that or add or even necessarily remove columns that we don't really require. And we'll demonstrate that a little later on as well. I'll close these two and we'll come back to our standard complete as the example. A report configuration, and that's what these are. So down here, These are all report configurations, and actually the standard is one report configuration, but it has 3 layouts. What I want to point out next is at the top here, there are 3 parts to a SoftList configuration. It's options, the materials, and the layout. I'm going to select materials, and this brings up a list of all known materials for that current configuration. To understand how material quantities are estimated, I'm going to take the example of concrete footing here at the top, and I'm going to hit the Edit button, which will edit the current selected material. It brings up our material setup dialog, and this is basically how the program estimates, in this case, concrete footing. When the program processes your floor plan to determine quantities, it needs to break the materials into what we call groups. And as you see here at the top, the concrete footings first group is wall. So group is the first, we'll say, condition each material needs to satisfy in order for it to list a quantity of material. So this material setup basically is a series of, as I initially stated, a series of conditions. So each object that you've drawn in your floor plan needs to satisfy a series of conditions before a material quantity can be estimated for it. And the first condition that the object must satisfy is the group of which that material belongs to. To put that into context, when we come to the foundation plan and we are looking for walls, it's going to obviously ignore any windows. It's going to ignore the concrete slab because those are not walls. So it skips those altogether and just looks at any object that is of a wall. Once it finds a wall, it has further conditions that that wall must meet before it gets estimated. And those conditions are labeled here. So just below the material name and just above selection limits, we call this the selection criteria. These are further conditions that the material must meet before it can be estimated. And this selection criteria will change depending on the group chosen. To clarify, when you start from scratch and create a new material, the first thing you're asked to do is to select the material group. What group is this material going to be based off of? Once that group is determined, the selection criteria is reflective of that group. And again, these are further conditions. It must meet the wall part of being a wall. There's also stud, header, sill, or shear panel. So if you're estimating one of those, you make that the selected wall part. The wall must be bearing, so non-bearing walls are ignored. The length is determined by the center length of it, of each wall. And it only is going to use walls that have a footing. So if it doesn't have a footing, it's going to ignore that wall. Once it has met the selection criteria, once it has met those conditions, it then comes down to calculating its quantity. So how does it calculate its quantity? SoftList uses a series of variables, and those variables are assigned to each group for known properties of that group. So areas and lengths and heights. Each of those values are derived from the actual floor plan and are assigned logical variables within SoftList. So if we're here estimating the length, or sorry, in this case, cubic yards. So if we're estimating the cubic yards of concrete footing, we need to know how long the footing is, the footing depth, and the footing width. Multiply those 3 together, you get a volume. The default unit of measurement in SoftList is feet. So this result will give us square feet. Well, we need cubic yards. So we do one more math or piece of math, and that is entering a coverage. 1 cubic yard covers 27 cubic feet. That is what the coverage does. It allows us to change the unit into a better unit of measurement. We also have the ability to add number of decimal places. We're getting it to 1 decimal place. So if we needed to modify how a material is to be estimated, we do so as follows. Let's say, for example, we want to change the units from cubic yards to lineal feet. We first change the unit, but changing the unit does not do anything to how the math is handled. We have to go in here and do it ourselves. Preceding or between each of these fields is a little button currently set to the multiplication sign. I'm going to set that to none. Removes it altogether. So now the formula is simply the length. Since feet is the unit of measurement, the coverage of 27 no longer makes sense, so I'll delete it. I don't need half a foot or 0.6 of a foot. I just want the nearest whole foot. So I'll change my number of decimal places back to 0. So I've made a modification to how concrete footings are estimated, basically coming into the materials list, locating the material, and changing how the quantity is to be calculated. If I select OK, save all my changes, and hitting OK down here, the concrete footing, if I scroll to the top, is now listing 82 feet rather than a cubic yardage. One thing I neglected to do here is change how much 1 foot cost. Right now it's $117, but that was how much 1 cubic yard costs. An alternative method for modifying a material is to right-click on the material's name and select Edit Material. This brings up the similar dialog we were just looking at. And if I come to Accounting, and from the accounting, we can see the cost information. And if I punch in maybe 8.5, there we go. And let's say $1.60 for the labor. Select OK. And that cost is now reflected here in the report. So 2 ways we can modify a material. We can get a global list of all the materials through the material button up at the top, or right-clicking on it and editing material. They both bring up the what we call formula for that material. If you want to know what objects on the drawing are accounting for that material, we can right-click on it and the ability to highlight that entity. In this case, it's discovering that there are 4 objects in the basement plan that are accounting for concrete footing. Let's take a look at our drain tile that I keep saying is wrong. If I right-click on drain tile, it says under highlight entities, there are 4 objects accounting for its quantity. If I select that, it's going to open up that drawing and highlight those objects. So these 4 walls are accounting for drain tile. SoftList is very accurate when you're drawing an actual item. So we were actually drawing walls with footings. So the program is very accurate to how those footing quantities are estimated. There is actually 82 feet there. However, with drain tile, we're not actually drawing it. So the program has to assume where that material is based on the existence of an actual material. And I call this actual materials versus assumed materials. When we are estimating an object, if the object is actually drawn, the estimate is very accurate. If the material is assumed, because you're not actually drawing it, the quantity may or may not be as accurate as if it were an actual material. This is where we get into creating your own materials. So SoftPlan has the ability to create your own materials. In SoftList mode, just want to point out where that is, we have the ability to draw what we call takeoffs. If I pick, for example, this blue wide highlighter and do a manual trace, if I assume that this takeoff is weep tile, I can be very accurate as to where weep tile needs to go. Let's say it doesn't need to be at the front of the house for whatever reason. I just need the 3 sides. Now that I am drawing it, it's a very accurate material. But we have to tell SoftList side that that is our intention of it. Down the side here, there is a takeoff types report configuration. If I run it, it's used to take a look at the takeoff types that are drawn. In this case, the wide highlighter, blue, and I'm looking at lengths. So the edge length, I got 66 feet. That's how much weep tile I need. So I can generate a takeoff types report, take a look at the value for the type of highlighter I drew, and get a material report estimate for it. Now I know I need 66 feet of weep tile. I can maybe come back to my thing here and say, well, no, that needs to be 66. Another alternative is to then redefine how weep tile is configured. Back to materials. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to turn the weep tile, or what I've been relabeling as drain tile, into an actual material. So if I take my weep tile that is currently defined, again, I can edit it and take a look at how it's being estimated. Again, it's based on group walls, so it takes a look at walls, and basically it looks at any wall that has a footing. And if it has a footing, it gives me the length of that wall plus a little bit extra for the footing width, just to go on the outside of the footings. That's how it is estimated. And that works under the assumption that every wall with a footing requires a weep tile along its edge. If that's not true, to gain a very accurate material report, we invent a draw tool to make it accurate. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm using the wide highlighter blue to be accurate. So I'll hit OK. I'm going to set the include option for weep tile to no, because I don't want it to be estimated on walls with footing. I want it to be estimated on the weep tile, or sorry, the takeoff type I drew. So when we create a brand new material, we do so by hitting the Insert button. And when we insert a brand new material, we are first prompted with a group to select. As I was pointing out earlier, SoftList organizes its materials into logical groups. So now we need to choose a group that this material will be based off of. Again, it's going to be a takeoff, and takeoff is one of those groups. So in this case, it's now going to ignore walls and only look at the takeoff I drew. I'm going to call it drain tile as opposed to weep. And specify my units as feet. Again, changing the units does not magically configure the quantity on its own. That is something we have to take care of. Notice that the selection criteria has changed because it's now a new group. In this case, I want to look at the edges of the takeoff I've drawn. And if I come to this, I only want to, if I uncheck link whole library, click on wide highlighter and then blue, only takeoffs that are drawn from the wide highlighter's library and the blue color will be counting. So if I draw a takeoff for another purpose, as long as it's not the blue, it would be ignored by this drain tile formula. I then come down to the calculation of its quantity, and I need to pose the length of that. Well, again, the program uses a series of variables which are assigned known properties of the group chosen. Well, I'm taking a look at the question mark button here, and it will give me a list of those known variables. So these are specific to component by edge. That's the component I've chosen. And the variable for the length is the variable edge underscore length. There's a description down here to indicate what that is, and that's what I'm after, the length of each edge of that takeoff poly. Hit OK. I'll save my changes, and that adds a new material. If I select OK, the report will regenerate with the new drain tile. However, there's a problem. Down here it says there's an unreported quantity drain tile. This is because the new material I've just added has not yet been added to what we call the layout. It needs to know where it's going to include itself. I can double click on this error and this opens up our layout. Across the top there were 3 options. We went to materials, we're now under the layout. From the layout we can see under the right hand side there's a drain tile. Everything else is in gray except drain tile because drain tile is not yet included in the layout. It doesn't know where to list. I'll scroll down. There's the original weep. It's now a matter of dragging and dropping that. Oops, I think I missed it. Drag and drop, and that will then include the new drain tile material. Here it is, next to the original weep. Now I've disabled weep, so I'll never count the weep tile based on footing lengths. Instead, it's going to use the drain tile. Coming back to, or hitting OK, I guess, it will regenerate this report. And if I now look for drain tile, it comes up with the estimate that is required for it. Okay, so when we generate a report, again, the report is using your floor plans as a database of information. As long as that floor plans are drawn accurately, the material report is accurate. And the materials are either based on actual materials or actual items drawn, or they're based on assumed materials, those things that you're not actually drawing, keeping in mind that if it's an assumed material, it may not be as accurate. Anchor bolts, you're not actually drawing anchor bolts, so they're assumed. If I take a look at its material, anchor bolts are assumed. Unfortunately, this one's not a good one to do the example of because it's an accumulation, but anchor bolts are assumed to be either on a pressure-treated bottom plate or the sill plate of your floor system. Those are 2 different formulas that are accumulated together to give me total anchor bolts. But again, we're not actually drawn, so it is an assumed material, but the assumption is fairly accurate. That is always the case. If I come to File and Project Options, Report Configurations, what I want to point out here is that the SoftList has the ability to be specific to the project or global or common to all projects. Currently, it's common to all projects, so every change I made here, for example, this weep tile, that's a global change. This is because this project is using system report configurations. If I turn that off, the report configurations would be just specific to this project, and therefore this drain tile would not be included if it were in a second or a third project I create. Since it is using the defaults, if I come to File and go to System Options, here we come to SoftList Report Configurations. These are the default configurations that are included with the program. We come to Standard and Configure. This brings up for the initially the materials. This is the first list of materials that we saw, although we were looking at it through a specific project. However, that project that we just pointed out is global for its report materials, and so drain tile is part of the system. If I come to Layouts, select and expand concrete block, you'll notice that drain tile is not yet included. Well, it is, but it's only included in the layout that was active in that particular project, which was the complete layout. Top left shows me the 3 layouts: by floor, complete, and summary. So if I want to generate a by floor report to include this new drain tile, I need to include that in that layout as well. So every time you create a new material, if you have more than one layout, that needs to be included in each of those layouts. If I come to complete, weep tile is still great because, again, that's what it was initially done in the project. It's already in its own layout, but it's not yet in summary. So if I click on summary, we'll see drain tile is no longer grade. It needs to be added here as well. Same idea, drag and drop. Hit OK and OK. If I make any changes at the system level, any active SoftList report in that project that is relying on the default or the system level will update. Now, there was no change made specifically to the standard complete, but if I were to generate the standard summary, it's now also included my drain tile because I've included it now in all the layouts for that configuration. So once again, changing materials within a report is as easy as finding the material. Let's do one more example. Baseboard, for example. It's currently in lineal feet. Let's say, for example, you want to specify the number of pieces of baseboard. They're 16-foot lengths. Right-click, edit material. Baseboard is its own group. I'm going to change my units to pieces. And one piece covers 16 feet. When you're modifying a report or a material as such, it's probably a good idea to describe the piece that's being estimated. And this is what the calculation of dimensions does. You'll see that there's a description column in the generated report. Currently, it was only at the height of the baseboard, 4 inches. I'm now going to include 4 inches by 16 feet to describe the size of one piece of baseboard. The height is actually a variable, so it goes to the floor plan to discover how tall your baseboard is, but every piece will be 16 feet. Ultimately, you come to accounting as well, and we input a price per piece, so it's $17 for a 16-foot piece, and to install it, it's $5, whatever that needs to be. You also discover here under accounting is the markup and, if necessary, a waste factor as well. Those are percentages, so you can enter those per material in that area. And if I hit OK, save my changes. Again, this is a global change, but you can see how the report has updated to reflect that type of change. Okay, so that's basically all I wanted to demonstrate. Hopefully you got a kind of a better understanding as to how SoftList works. To recap, it's based on the accuracy of your floor plans. The floor plans become a database of information for the report. And if you're looking to get an accurate listing of a particular material, you need to understand if the material is an actual item or an assumed item. If it's assumed, you're basing it on the existence of something else, where if it's an actual item, it's a much more accurate count. And you can invent, as necessary, actual materials through the takeoff types of SoftList mode. Manipulating the material formulas themselves is a matter of just editing the material formula, making sure the units are properly set, and specifying the appropriate calculation for that quantity as required. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an in-depth to how SoftList works and how to understand where to go ahead and make certain changes. We realize that SoftList, when you're first starting out using it, it might be a little bit confusing as to how and what exactly are the changes required. And this is where we stress that, take advantage of the technical support that's offered to you, and we can certainly guide you through making some of these changes. And once you get involved with it, you'll understand basically how simple it really can be to get a more accurate material report based on how you estimate. So I thank you all for joining me today, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.